Elvis. We have all the flowers and the letters and the cards that you have sent since the passing away of my son.
After Vernon Presley passed away, the family faced one final mystery. Hidden away for years was a secret safe that few people knew existed. When it was finally opened, what they found inside left relatives stunned and raised questions no one expected. Was Vernon hiding something important all along? What shocking discovery was waiting inside? Join us as we uncover the truth. The key he never explained. Vernon Presley was not a complicated man. He was quiet, steady, and loyal in the way that simple men often are, not because life had been easy, but because he had decided, somewhere along the way, that loyalty was the only thing worth holding on to. He had watched his son become the most famous person on earth, and through all of it, he had remained the same man he always was. A father, a keeper of things, someone who understood that some doors were not meant to be opened lightly. He kept his feelings close. He did not speak unless he had something worth saying. And when he did speak, people listened, not because he demanded it, but because there was a quiet weight to him, the kind that comes from carrying things for a very long time. When Vernon Presley died, the house did not just lose a person, it lost its anchor. Grief does strange things to a family. It pulls people together and tears them apart at the same time. In the days that followed Vernon's passing, the Presley family moved through the rooms of that familiar house in a kind of daze, touching things gently, as though the walls themselves were fragile. Every drawer, every shelf, every folded piece of clothing held some echo of the man who had gone. There were meals that nobody really ate. There were conversations that trailed off into silence. There were moments when someone would begin a sentence and forget how to finish it. And there were the belongings that needed to be sorted. It is a painful and necessary thing, going through a person's life after they are gone. You hold their ordinary objects, a pen, a watch, a folded receipt from somewhere, and you feel the strange weight of how ordinary everything is, and how much it meant simply because it was theirs. It was during this quiet, heavy work that someone mentioned the safe. Not everyone had known about it. That was the first thing that struck the family when the subject came up. It was not hidden in plain sight. It was tucked inside a private room, in a part of the house that Vernon had always kept to himself, a space that was his and his alone. Those who did know about it remembered something specific, the way Vernon's expression changed whenever it came up. He did not get angry. He did not make a scene. He simply went still in a way that communicated everything without saying a word. That is not something we discuss. The subject would close as quickly as it had opened, and nobody pushed further. That was the kind of man he was. You respected what he did not offer. Over the years, quiet theories had formed, the way theories always do when something is deliberately kept out of reach. Some believed it held financial documents, records from the complicated business of managing Elvis's estate. Others suspected personal items, letters perhaps, photographs, the kinds of things a father keeps because he cannot bring himself to throw them away. But nobody knew, because Vernon had never said. The search for the key began almost naturally, the way these things do. Someone suggested it, others agreed, and so, with a mix of grief and curiosity, pulling in the same direction, the family began to look. They went through desks, they opened old cabinets that had not been touched in years. They sorted through drawers filled with the small, forgotten objects that accumulate over a lifetime. Rubber bands, old stamps, handwritten notes that meant nothing to anyone else but had clearly meant something to him. Hours passed. The light shifted. People sat down and stood back up. The search had the feeling of something inevitable, as though the key had to exist, had to be somewhere, and was simply waiting to be found. And then, finally, it was. It was small, unremarkable, the kind of key you might overlook a dozen times before noticing it. It had been placed deliberately, carefully, among Vernon's most private possessions. Not hidden exactly, but protected, set apart from the ordinary things, in the way you set apart what matters. When someone held it up, the room went quiet. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of a held breath. They gathered around the safe, this heavy sealed thing that had sat in that private room through years and decades, through grief and change and the long, slow passage of time. Vernon had kept his secret well. Whatever was inside had waited patiently, the way secrets do when they are properly kept. The key turned slowly. There was the soft, firm sound of the mechanism releasing, A sound that felt, in that moment, louder than it had any right to be. The door opened, and the family leaned in. They had prepared themselves, in the way you prepare for something you have been imagining for years. They expected the practical things, documents, financial records, the paperwork of a complicated estate, the things a careful man keeps locked away because they are important and nobody else's business. But what met their eyes in that first moment was not what any of them had expected. The confusion was immediate, quiet, but real. People exchanged glances. Someone exhaled slowly, because it was not a financial record. It was not the legal architecture of an estate. It was something else entirely. And standing there, in that private room, with the door finally open and the years of silence finally broken, the family began to understand something they had not understood before. Vernon Presley had not simply been protecting paperwork. He had been protecting a story. And now, at last, it was theirs to read. The hidden treasures of a father's heart. Vernon Presley had never been a man of grand gestures. He did not make speeches. He did not wear his heart on his sleeve the way some men do, loudly and without apology. His love was quieter than that, the kind you only recognize when you stop and pay attention. It showed up in small things, in the way he remembered details others forgot, in the way he held on to things that the rest of the world had long let go. He was a man who understood that the ordinary moments were the ones worth saving. A ticket stub, a folded note, a photograph taken on an unremarkable afternoon that later became the only proof that afternoon had ever existed. Vernon collected these things not out of habit, but out of devotion. He was, at his core, a man who loved deeply and quietly, and the safe in that private room was, it turned out, the truest portrait of who he really was. Nobody spoke much as the door swung open. The family stood close together, the way people do when they are bracing for something they cannot yet name. The room was still. Outside, the world continued its ordinary business, but in that small, private space, time had slowed to almost nothing. And then someone reached inside. The first thing that came out was an envelope, old, its edges soft and worn in the way that paper gets when it has been handled many times, or simply when it has lived long enough in the same place. It was followed by another, and then another, each one placed with a care that was immediately obvious, not stacked carelessly, not tossed in together, but arranged, ordered, treated with a reverence that said, without any words at all, these things matter. The family looked at one another. Whatever they had expected, it was not this. The letters came first. There were more of them than anyone had anticipated. Some were in envelopes that had been sealed and resealed. Others were loose pages, folded carefully and preserved as though they were fragile things, which, in every way that mattered, they were. As family members began to read, the room changed. These were not formal letters. They were not the kind of correspondence you might expect to find in a locked safe, business matters, legal language, the dry paperwork of a complicated life. These were personal, deeply, almost startlingly personal. Words written in moments of real emotion, during times when the Presley family had been tested and bruised by circumstances that had never been fully discussed in public. There were things in those letters that nobody in the room had known, conversations that had happened privately, between people who trusted each other enough to be honest. Words that had been written during the hardest seasons of the family's life, during loss, during confusion, during the long and painful aftermath of things that had changed everything. One relative read a passage aloud, and the words hung in the air the way certain words do. Not dramatic, not performed, but true in a way that lands differently than anything rehearsed could. He felt things, someone said quietly. He just never showed it. And there it was. The man they thought they knew, becoming someone fuller, someone they had perhaps understood only partially, all this time. Then came the keepsakes. They were not valuable in any way the world would measure. There was nothing flashy about them, nothing that would mean anything to a stranger. But to the people in that room, each small object that emerged from the safe carried a weight entirely out of proportion to its size. These were pieces of a life. Specifically, pieces of Elvis's life from the early years, before everything became enormous, before the name became a legend, and the man became difficult to separate from the myth. Small, ordinary things that connected back to a time when he was simply a boy from Tupelo, and Vernon was simply his father, a father who had kept everything. The family turned these objects over slowly, carefully, the way you handle something you are afraid might disappear if you hold it too tightly. And they began to understand something that had not been fully clear before. Vernon had not simply been storing memories, he had been preserving them, deliberately, consistently, over many years. He had understood, perhaps better than anyone, that the small things were the ones most likely to be lost, and he had made it his quiet purpose to make sure they weren't. He never talked about any of this, someone said. Not with accusation, with wonder. And then, near the bottom of the safe, one item emerged that changed the feeling in the room completely. It is difficult to explain what a single object can do to a group of people who share a history. How something small, something that, to an outsider, might look almost unremarkable, can reach into the past and pull it forward with a force that takes the breath away. This was that kind of object. It was connected to a moment in the family's history that everyone in that room carried quietly. A painful chapter. The kind that does not fully close, no matter how many years pass. And seeing it there, held in someone's hands, preserved with the same careful love as everything else in that safe, was almost more than the room could hold. Nobody said anything for a long moment. One person turned away. Another pressed their hand over their mouth. Tears came without warning, the way they do when something reaches past your defenses before you have time to prepare. Vernon had not just kept memories, he had kept grief, he had kept love. He had kept the proof that things had mattered, that people had mattered even when the world had moved on and the noise of ordinary life had made it easy to forget. The safe had not been locked to keep people out. It had been locked to keep something safe. And deep beneath everything the family had already found, something else was still waiting. The secret Vernon never talked about. There are people in every family who carry more than their share, who absorbs the weight of things quietly, without complaint, without the need for acknowledgement. They are not the ones at the center of the story. They are the ones standing just outside the frame, steady, watchful, making sure the people they love do not fall apart. Vernon Presley was that kind of man. He was not mysterious by nature, he was private. There is a difference. A mysterious person invites questions. A private person has simply decided that certain things belong only to them, that some feelings are too deep, too tender, too complicated to survive the open air. Vernon had lived long enough to know which of his thoughts could be shared and which ones needed to be kept close. And so, he kept them, quietly, faithfully, for years. What the family did not know, what none of them could have known, was that he had also written them down. It was near the back of the safe. Everything else had been found by this point. The letters, the keepsakes, the small and devastating objects that had already remade the family's understanding of who Vernon was. They had cried, they had held each other, they had sat in silence with things they did not yet have words for. And then someone reached further in. The package was different from everything else in the safe. That was clear immediately. Where the other items had the soft, worn quality of things handled over time, this one had the stillness of something that had not been touched in years. It sat at the back as though it had been placed there deliberately, not forgotten, but saved, set aside for the right moment, or perhaps for a moment Vernon himself would never see. His handwriting was on the front, not a name, not a label, words, a message, written in the careful, unhurried hand of a man who had thought seriously about what he wanted to say. The family went still. Someone lifted it gently, the way you lift something you are not sure you are ready for. They turned it over. They looked at the words on the front, and for a moment, nobody moved. "He wrote this for us," someone said softly. The room held its breath. Inside was a written statement. Several pages, filled with Vernon's voice, not the public version of him, not the composed and careful man the world occasionally glimpsed, but the real one. The one that had existed beneath the surface all along, thinking and feeling things he had never found a way to say. He explained the safe. He explained why it had been locked, why it had been kept private, why even the people closest to him had been kept away from it. And the explanation was not what anyone expected. It was not about secrecy for its own sake. It was not about distrust. It was about fear. A quiet, persistent fear that had followed him for years. The fear that the things which mattered most could be lost. That memory was fragile, that people moved on, and the world moved on with them. And the things that had been real and precious and irreplaceable had a way of disappearing without anyone noticing until it was too late. He had been afraid of forgetting, and he had been afraid of being forgotten. As the words were read aloud, the room changed in a way that is hard to describe. It was as though the air itself became heavier and softer at the same time. Because hearing a person's private thoughts, their real thoughts, the ones they protected carefully during their lifetime, is one of the most intimate things one human being can experience with another. There were regrets in those pages. Vernon named them plainly, without self-pity. Things he wished he had said. Moments he had let pass because he did not know how to fill them with the right words. He was not a man who found expression easy, and he knew it, and it had cost him, in small, accumulating ways that he had apparently carried in silence for a very long time. "I kept these things," he had written, "because I did not know how to keep them any other way." The family sat with that for a long time, because in those few words, something shifted. Stories they had told themselves for years, about Vernon's distance, about his silence, about the choices he had made that sometimes confused or hurt the people around him, began to look different. The man they had sometimes misread as cold, or closed, or difficult to reach revealed himself to be something else entirely. He had been overwhelmed. He had loved so much, and known so little about how to show it, that he had done the only thing that made sense to him. He had preserved it. He had locked it away where it would be safe, where the world could not touch it, where it would still be there, intact and whole, long after he was gone. His actions rearranged themselves in their memory, the privacy that had sometimes felt like distance, the protectiveness that had sometimes felt like control. Seen through the lens of his own words, these things became what they had always actually been, expressions of a love that did not know how to make itself small enough to be said out loud. Assumptions that had stood for decades began, quietly, to come apart. And then someone found the last item. It had been beneath the papers. Hidden not dramatically, but simply, the way important things often are, underneath the ordinary layers of a life. Nobody had been looking for it specifically. Nobody had known to look. But there it was. The object connected three things at once: Vernon, Elvis, and something that belonged to the family's history in a way that went beyond any individual person. It was a link, a physical, tangible link between a father and a son, and the story that had tied them together across time. When it was held up, no one spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because some moments are larger than words, and the people in that room understood, all at once, that they were standing inside one. Vernon had not simply left them his memories. He had left them proof of something they had perhaps always suspected, but never been able to hold in their hands. And now, finally, they could. The legacy left behind.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for all the cards and letters that you have sent since the passing away of my son, Elvis. We have all the flowers and the letters and the cards, which we will eventually get around to answering the majority of them.
Vernon Presley was not the kind of man who needed to be understood. He did not ask for that. He did not arrange his life around the opinions of others or spend his quiet hours wondering how he appeared to the world. What he wanted, what he had always wanted from the very beginning, was simpler and more durable than recognition. He wanted the people he loved to be safe. He wanted the things that mattered to be kept. He wanted to make sure that when the noise of a remarkable and often painful life finally settled, what remained was true. That was who he was. Not a man of performance, not a man of polish. A man of purpose, slow and steady, and absolutely committed to the things he had decided were worth protecting. He had grown up with very little, and that kind of beginning teaches a person something that comfort never can. It teaches you that things disappear, that people disappear, that if you do not hold on carefully, the most important parts of your life will slip away before you have a chance to say goodbye. Vernon had spent a lifetime holding on carefully, and now, at last, his family understood why. The room was quieter than it had been in days. The safe stood open, its contents had been brought out piece by piece, held in trembling hands, read with voices that sometimes broke and sometimes simply stopped. The letters, the keepsakes, the written statement in Vernon's own hand, filled with the private thoughts of a man who had carried them alone for years. And finally, that last object, the one no one had expected, the one that had connected everything and left the room without words. Now the family sat with all of it around them, and something had settled, Not peace, exactly. It was too soon for peace, and grief does not move that quickly. But understanding. A new and quiet understanding that had not existed in that room before the safe was opened. They had come to sort through belongings. They had found, instead, a man. The Vernon they had known, or believed they knew, had always carried a certain distance. Not coldness, never that, but a reserve that could sometimes feel like a wall. There had been moments over the years when his silence had been difficult to sit with, when his protectiveness had felt more like withholding than love. Families carry these small wounds. They accumulate without anyone intending it, and they shape the way people see each other over time. But the safe had answered questions that had never quite been asked out loud. It had explained, without apology and without performance, that the distance had never been indifference. The silence had never been emptiness. Vernon had simply loved, in a language that did not use many words, and the safe had been his dictionary all along. Every item inside it represented a person, a moment, a piece of someone he had not been able to let go of. He had not been keeping secrets from his family. He had been keeping his family, preserved and whole, from the passage of time. But the question of what came next was not simple. As the initial weight of the discovery began to settle, a quieter and more complicated conversation found its way into the room. It began gently, the way honest conversations between people who love each other often do, with someone simply saying what they were thinking, and others slowly adding their own thoughts around it. Some felt strongly that what was in the safe should remain exactly where it had been, private, protected, belonging to the family alone. These were intimate things, letters written in pain, objects tied to moments that had never been meant for the world. Vernon had locked them away for a reason, and perhaps that reason deserved to be honored. The world had already taken so much from this family. It had watched them and written about them and formed opinions about them for decades. What was inside that safe was one of the few things that had never been touched by any of that. There was something sacred in that, something worth preserving. Others felt differently, not because they wanted to make anything public, but because they understood that some pieces of what Vernon had kept were larger than one family's grief. They were pieces of history, evidence of a human story that existed beneath the famous one, quieter, more tender, and in many ways more true. To lock that away again, permanently and without thought, felt like its own kind of loss. Vernon had written his statement with the clear intention that it would one day be found. He had left the key among his private things. He had, in his way, made a choice. The conversation went on for a long time. There were tears in it. There were disagreements, soft but real. There were moments when someone said something that landed heavily and the room had to sit with it before anyone could respond. This was what love looked like in practice, not tidy, not simple, not resolved in a single afternoon, but honest. And honest was what Vernon had always deserved. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, the conversation turned. It turned toward him, and toward Elvis, and toward the long, extraordinary, deeply human story that had connected them, a father and a son, moving through a life that neither of them had been prepared for, doing their best with what they had, failing sometimes and loving always. Family members began to remember things, small things, the kind that surface when people are finally still enough to let them. A gesture, a phrase, a moment that had seemed unremarkable at the time, and now, seen from this new angle, carried a weight that was almost unbearable. Vernon had been there for so much of it, standing at the edges, holding things together in his quiet way, making sure nothing that mattered was lost. The sacrifices he had made came into focus slowly and then all at once. He had given things up that he had never spoken of. He had absorbed difficulties that had never been his fault. He had stood beside his son through circumstances that would have broken a lesser man, and he had done it without complaint, without bitterness, without asking for anything in return. The safe was not a place where he had hidden things. It was a place where he had put what he could not carry anymore, not because he wanted to set it down, but because he needed somewhere safe enough to hold it. When the time came, the family returned everything carefully. Each item went back the way it had been found, with attention, with gentleness, with the same care that Vernon himself had used when he placed them there. It was a slow process. Nobody rushed it. Every envelope, every folded page, every small and irreplaceable object was placed back in its position, as though the arrangement itself was part of the message. The room felt different than it had before the safe was opened. Something had been released into it, some truth that had been waiting patiently in the dark for the right hands and the right moment. The mystery was gone, but what replaced it was better than mystery. It was clarity. It was the rare and quiet comfort of finally knowing. When the heavy door swung closed for the last time and the key was turned, nobody said anything for a moment. Then someone said simply, "He loved us." And that was exactly right. Vernon Presley had not left behind wealth. He had not left behind answers to the world's questions or explanations for things that had long been speculated about. What he had left behind was something quieter and more lasting. He had left behind proof, held in worn envelopes and careful handwriting and small objects that meant nothing to anyone else. That love, when it is real, finds a way to survive everything. Even time, even silence, even death. The key he had left among his private things was not an accident. It never had been. He had known, in the way that careful people know things, that the right hands would eventually find it, that the right moment would come, that the story he had never been able to tell out loud would one day be read by the people it was always meant for. He had trusted them with it, and in the end, that trust, quiet, patient, absolute, was the greatest thing he had ever kept.